you tonight to this talk titled Landing an Executive Level Job. As you know, my name is Jay Yoza. I want to start with a career advice that I came across, which I thought was pretty good. It wasn't my advice, it's something I came across while I was reading Scott Adams' book titled How to Fail at Almost Anything, something like that. He's if you're not familiar with him, the Dilbert cartoon fame. And after he got his college diploma, he's going from New York to Los Angeles to get a job. And luck has it that he's sitting next to a guy who's a CEO. And he gives him I think, a terrific career advice. He said, how do you think I became the CEO? He said, every time I got a job, I immediately started looking for the next job. And his reasoning made a lot of sense. He said, those good jobs don't become available when you're looking for it. You got to grab them when they're available. And he said, well, the question must have turned to loyalty. He said, look, we live in a capitalist society where the rules are known. When it's right for the company to make the business decision, they're not going to think twice before letting you go. And you have to do the same. I didn't do that. I wish I had gotten that advice much earlier in my career when I started. I was just the opposite. As soon as I got a job, I was so happy, I was just like all out, and then something happens that's completely outside your control, and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's when you run into trouble. So I wanted to share that. And another reason is that, what exactly is the right analogy today when it comes to career? We all know that analogy that was used before, that career is like a ladder, is pretty much gone, because that doesn't exist. Then people said it's more like a lattice. It could be. And then when Sheryl Sandberg wrote her book, Lean In, she was talking about it's more like a jungle gym. That may be true, but I think the analogy that I like, it's more like you're like an American ninja warrior, that I like to think of as a business ninja warrior, where you basically have to go from one obstacle to the next, each one being more difficult than the previous one. And at the end, if you get there, you get to the top. And you can't worry about it if you fail and embarrass yourself and get wet. You just get up and do it again. So before I get too much into it, let me first thank you all for taking time out and attending this talk. It means a lot to me that you took time out to come spend 50 minutes to an hour here tonight. Second, I want to thank the Sheila Algaba and the Middletown Library for organizing this event. And lastly, I want to thank the Middletown residents for supporting this excellent library and helping create this stronger community here in Middletown. So thank you all. A little bit, so the audience. So this speech is targeted towards three audiences here. The first one are people who are early in their career, who want to kind of get jump-started and get on that fast track to becoming an executive level, get the executive level job in the near future. The second audience are people in their mid-level career who may already have a lot of experience and skills, but who may need to tweak their approach to get back on that fast track to getting an executive level job. And the third are people who are just curious about it. They're not sure whether they want to get on that track. But one thing I'll tell you, that today in companies, there are only three things that can happen to you. You're either moving up, you're moving nowhere, or you're moving out. And two out of those three is not going to get you on the fast track to becoming an executive. You have to think big, and you have to think strategic. A little bit about myself. So I started, after getting my degree in computer science and electrical engineering, I was a software engineer for a number of years. Then I moved into technical sales, and then from technical sales into business development sales. I primarily focused on developing and nurturing strategic partnerships to generate sales for companies like Oracle and some of the big companies like that. And then I got moved out. So at that point, I had to make a decision whether to go back into the corporate world or do something completely different. So I started doing business consulting, and I was helping technical startups drive sales. And then eventually I transitioned into what I'm doing right now, which is speak, write, and coach. And what I focus on is this. That's my tagline. I make people thrive on high-stakes stage. So what does that mean? When you're in front of an audience, that's a very precious time you have. You're either going to win or lose. It just comes down to that. That's why it's high stakes. And there are a lot of people who really struggle with that when they get in front of an audience, whether it's a small group or in front of a large audience. And you have to approach that as a high stakes event, and you have to do a great job. So I coach people on that. And the second is I coach people who are also pursuing senior executive level job. And I coach them so that they're well prepared and they do a fantastic job. So, a little bit backstory about this presentation. So this presentation came about for the work that I do for this organization called Hire Heroes USA. I don't know if anybody have heard about this. What they do is they help military veterans who are transitioning from military to civilian world. And they specifically focus on making sure they get those high-paying, good jobs. They came to me because of my success coaching many of these veterans. The area that they were having difficulties reaching out to veterans with a lot of experience, people who've been in the military for 20, 30 years. They said, we need a presentation or somebody who can really speak to them, to kind of explain to them how they can get this senior exec level job that they don't think that we can help them get. So I put together a presentation, and the feedback that I received was very positive. So I said, why don't I take that presentation and bring it out to a wider audience? Because I think with little tweaking here and there, taking some of the military jargon out, it applies to just about anybody. So that's the little backstory of this presentation. And also, I authored a book last year called Winning Speech Moments that you saw, How to Achieve Your Objective with Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere. And what that book focuses on is that there are 3 things you have to master when you are giving a speech, whether it's one-on-one, small group, or large audience. Content, message, and performance. And the most important one out of those is really the performance. And I'll cover that later in this talk. But at this point, let me move on. So, if you're giving an executive talk, there's got to be an executive summary. So the big idea, I'll give it to you right up front, that to land an executive level job, you have to think, speak, and act like an executive. Why? As you all know about that famous sign that Harry Truman had on his desk, the buck stops with you. And the 3 things that I'm going to focus on is talk about the practices and the skills that you need as an executive to be effective. And the second is, how do executives think? Executives are very paranoid, and there's a reason why, because of the change that's constantly taking place that can affect their business. So if you're starting to talk, if you want to talk like an executive, you have to sound a little bit paranoid. And third is, you have to perform like an executive. Now those are the 3 things that I'm going to focus on. But that's not the reason why you're here. I want you to come up with your ideas after listening to me, because something is going to trigger some things that you have done in the past. So I'd like you to at least come up with 3 ideas and then make notes, and then we can address them in a Q&A at the end of the talk. So let's get to the top. Who can be an executive? The answer is anyone. An executive is a person responsible for getting the right things done. But what right things? The executives have to prioritize in making sure that 1 or 2 things that you pick will have the biggest impact. And the third is that you have to be accountable for the results. So if you look at that definition individually, we're all executives. I made an executive decision to contact the Middletown Library to give this talk. You made an executive decision to spend 1 hour this evening here. As parents, we're executives in raising children so that they do well and have a good future. And then some of you may want to take on additional roles, either in your school organization, in this library, or in religious organization. That's an executive role. And at some point saying, I can do the same thing in the business space. So an executive essentially is more of a mindset. If you focus on these three things, that you're responsible for getting right things done, your ability to prioritize so that you can make the biggest impact, and then you're held accountable for a result, you're an executive. So one thing you should take away is that all of you can be executives. But let's drill down further. But what makes an executive effective? An executive has to have knowledge. Then he has to turn that knowledge into action. That action, then you need buy-in, because no executive can do anything by himself or herself. And that's what produces results. Now, according to Peter Drucker was a famous management guru. And he wrote an excellent book titled The Effective Executive. And in it, based on his research, he said there are 8 practices that he has found that make an executive effective. The first 2 questions that executives ask are, what needs to be done? And the second question is, what's right for the enterprise? Now, if you're a president of the United States, you would say, what's right for the country, right? So one of the examples he gives in the book was Harry Truman. After he became president, he wanted to continue FDR's economic and social policies. But when he asked the question, what needs to be done, war had to be won, and then peace had to be sustained. So by doing that, he became one of the most successful foreign policy president. So he asked the right question. And similarly, individually, or if you're working for a company, that's where it all starts from. That gives you the knowledge. So now you've got the knowledge, now you've got to turn that into action. That means you've got to have an action plan to start with. You're not going to be wedded to the action plan because things can change. And as an executive, you have to make a decision whether you stay the course or you have to make some changes. And that's what an executive has to do. You're responsible for making that decision and then responsible for communicating to the rest of the team. And then on the business side, an executive has a bias towards opportunities, not problems. Not that you ignore problems, but problems prevents damage. It doesn't produce, opportunities produce results. So it's very important that an executive is always talking about growth opportunities. Like if you're interviewing, that's what you want to focus about. Because if you get hung up on problems, then you're not coming across like an executive. That's not how executives think. For example, when I have a problem with Amazon, on the other end of the line is not Jeff Bezos answering my phone call. He's focusing on he makes 3 decisions in a day, which industry he wants to take over. That's what he's focusing on. And that's what I want him to focus on, being a shareholder. So once you have the action plan, then you have to get the buy-in, right? This all makes sense. You're already probably doing all of this. And that means one of the tools that an executive has is how to be productive in running meetings. Because meetings, as you all know, can waste a lot of time, okay? And then the last one is executive has to create a team atmosphere because no executive can do anything by himself or herself. So it's very important that he has people that feel like they belong to something that is worthwhile. They want to work hard and produce. And the last thing that he put down, that this is more like a rule, is that executives are usually very good listeners. And they have to be, because if they're not listening to all different points, how can they possibly make the right decision? And they tend to speak last. Okay? So again, to summarize this, executives will try to gain the knowledge by asking those two questions, create an action plan, get the buy-in, that produces results. There's no guarantee this will always work, but not doing it will certainly lead to failure. Okay, as I mentioned before, that executives are paranoid. And this comes from this famous book that was written by a legendary CEO named Andy Grove from Intel, if you guys are all familiar with Andy Grove. And he wrote a book titled, Only the Paranoid Survive. I think if he was alive today, I think he would change that and say only the hyper-paranoid survive. And that's because change is happening so fast. And he said that in every point, there's that strategic inflection point that is either going to determine whether your business grows or your business declines. Now, the interesting thing is that point looks nice here on the graph, but in reality, that could be number of months or years. So how do you determine? That's looking backwards. You know, as Steve Jobs said, you can only look at dots going backwards. So that's a point when you look backwards. So how do you determine that point when you're looking forward? You've got to determine whether something is a signal or noise. And in his case, and it's worth reading this book, he determined very quickly, well, it wasn't that quick, he said it took 2 to 3 years, when Intel was losing to Japanese competition in memories, he had to make a tough choice. Do we continue to remain in the memory business or get out and go into something else? And he decided that Intel had to be in the microprocessor business. And as a result, Intel became a dominant company. You know, we talk about Intel and all that. That was that decision. That was that strategic inflection point where he had to make a decision. I had to make a change. To bring this home even much closer, when you want to give something more a vivid example, you turn to Hollywood. And specifically, you turn to one of the Godfather movies. In this case, I want to refer to Godfather Part 2. If you remember that scene where Michael Corleone goes to Cuba, and after his meeting with these political leaders, he stops at a point where they're making an arrest. If you remember that. I've seen this scene so many times. And one of the rebels, instead of being taken alive, he takes out a grenade from his jacket, and he explodes it, and he takes out the captain with him. As he was going to the party of Hyman Roth, now again, these are all mobsters, but they're all business executives, okay? So I just want to make it clear. And while they're having the party, Michael mentions this, and Hyman Roth's henchman, Johnny Ola, just dismisses, these are a bunch of lunatics. And then Michael says something very interesting. He said, you know, I was thinking about this, that it occurred to me that military police are paid, but rebels are not. And now Hyman Roth is getting a little worried here. And he's great acting job by Strasberg. So Michael, what does that tell you? And Michael says, they can win. Signal. There's something going on here. There could be a revolution. Do I want to invest in Cuba or not? Hyman Roth, on the other hand, dismisses it completely. He said, Michael, this rebel activity has been going on here for 50 years. There's nothing to it. Don't worry about it. Your father and we have gone through this. And the good news here is that Michael did not make the investment in Cuba. The bad news was he got pulled into Godfather Part 3. So one of the biggest paranoia today for executives is technology, that you would all agree. Technology is a great disruptor. The business hasn't changed. The business essentially only has two functions: get customers and keep customers. And the two functions are marketing and innovation, according to Peter Drucker. So what has changed? Technology. Technology can take one company and completely leapfrog the competition. So as an executive, if you're going for an interview, you've got to know technology today. You've got to really talk technology. It's been going on, since the mainframe computers, then you went to client server. And what I'm showing this slide here is this, that today, these companies that have made this digital transformation, like Amazon and Microsoft, it's indistinguishable whether they're a technology company or whether they're a business company. So you can't just say, I'm just a businessman. That's all getting embedded into the technology that's dominant today. So that means that as an executive, you've got to know the technology. And then you've got to know what's coming down the pike. The next thing that's coming is AI. At some point, AI will become, the companies are going to start making this AI transformation. And at that point, AI will be business. Business will be done according to the AI, how algorithms can determine, where Amazon can, based on their AI knowledge, may in the future may not wait for you to log into their Prime account to order things. They might just send you something every month, knowing your buying patterns, and then you can decide which items you want to keep and which items you want to return. And if they did that, they could increase their Prime account per person from $1,000 to maybe $5,000. And then, then the question is, what's next? And you also have to know that there are emerging technologies like blockchain. Blockchain has the potential to completely revolutionize how business can be done, because the middlemen can be completely eliminated. So the main purpose of this slide is that you have to start thinking like this. This is what scares executives. Hey, what's this change that's going to come up that's going to completely knock me out, knock my business out? So that means, from my research, from my coaching, there are only 3 things that you must, only 3 things, but these are 3 critical skills you must have today. You've got to understand data. You've got to know how to make good decisions. And then the most hardest of them all is communication. Data is hard itself, because you talk about there's big data, and then there's small data. Big data is where they just collect a lot of information and they tell you what is going on, right? Small data is where you have to make your observation. So an example that I want to give you here has to do with this product that you're all familiar with, Febreze, right? That air freshener. When Procter & Gamble first launched this product, when they tried to launch it, it didn't succeed. They couldn't figure out, why is this product that can remove some of the worst odors is not moving? They come across examples with one forest ranger who doesn't have a love life because she catches these wild animals, and some of them tend to be skunk, and she gets sprayed and she cannot retain boyfriends. Now, they gave her this Febreze, and afterwards they went to see her, and she was crying, said, "You just changed my life. I had no social life, now I do, thanks to your product." And these Procter & Gamble people now think that they're high-fiving, we got it now, we finally got our story that we need. And they're marketing it, it's not moving. And then they said, okay, let's try that may be a little bit far out, forest rangers. So they found people who have pets. And they found a woman that had 9 cats, and she said, I'd like to get rid of the smell. And the product did that. But still, the product doesn't move. Because the problem there is that she's not using the product. The problem is that people who have odors, they get desensitized to it. So they don't use the product. Then finally, to make the story short, they interviewed this one woman who has 4 boys. And they asked her, what kind of foul smell are you trying to get rid of? She said, "No, I'm not using it that way." And they're like, "What?" That's how we built this product, so that people would get rid of. Said, "No, after I clean their room, I'll just spray it on their comforter and the carpet, so that I get the satisfaction of cleaning their room. Because I got 4 boys, and I don't want their room to smell like locker room. And I use a bottle every 2 weeks." Whoa, that's something new. Wait a second. They had assumed that everybody that was going to buy this product was going to buy it to get rid of foul odors. Now they had to redo their marketing, and the product is not used in the front end, it's used in the back end. That means it's used as a reward. That's how so they had to redo the product where they had to put more scent in it, so now more people would use it, and also do the marketing that would promote that that's how this product can be used. And suddenly, this product became a billion-dollar category. So the point here is, there's data there. But as an executive, you've got to know both the big data, what it's telling you, and the small data. And then the ultimate is the decision making, is the reason why somebody's an executive. Jeff Bezos says he makes 3 decisions a day, and that usually happens between 10 and 12. Warren Buffett said he'd be lucky if he makes 3 good investment decisions during a year. And Ronald Reagan used to say, I'd be lucky if I make 3 good decisions throughout my presidential term. So decision making is not that simple. That's what executives do. That's why they get paid the big bucks. But decision making means that there is that human element. And one of my famous quotes, it's not a quote, but it's something I read in this book, which pretty much sets the stage. And it comes from this book by David Halberstam called The Best and the Brightest. And it's very early on. It's one of his favorite quote, actually. There is a quote there. And what happens is that Kennedy had put together one of the smartest cabinet ever, John F. Kennedy. And Lyndon Johnson attended that first cabinet meeting, and he just was blown away how smart the people were in that meeting. And he goes and sees his mentor, Sam Rayburn, who was the Speaker of the House. And he says, Sam, you couldn't believe how smart these people are, especially that Robert McNamara. He's just a genius. And Sam listens to him and says, well, Lyndon, you may be right. They may be smarter, one smarter than the next. But I would feel more comfortable if one of them had run for sheriff once. So the point he's making is that intelligence alone isn't going to solve problems. You need wisdom. And wisdom, for some in that room, came after Vietnam. So decision making is not that simple. You need data, you need your own intuition, and then you need wisdom. So this is something that's becoming more and more apparent as we are seeing some of the actions some of these executives are taking. The real hard one is the communication. You can have the data, you can make the decision making, but how do you get your message across? This is where you're either going to succeed or fail. So this is like an obstacle, right? You've been past that, you got this, now comes the communication. And communication is getting more and more difficult. It's simply because we got people who are asking the simple question all the time. So what, who cares? And you're done. And you don't have much time. How do you get your message across? One of the things that I came across recently when I was listening to Bob Schieffer, who was to be a Face the Nation, and he said something very interesting. He said that the president that is usually the successful presidents, they dominate the current medium of communication. And he goes through the history, says that the founding fathers were very good writers. And then came Abraham Lincoln, was probably one of our greatest public speaker of all time, but he was still a writer too. Then FDR, he mastered radio. And he realized in radio, you can't just yell at people. You have to have that conversation. So he created this fireside chats. So he mastered that medium, radio. Then, of course, came Kennedy, television. He knew exactly how to talk, he had the looks for it, and the humor, and he was just fantastic for that medium. Then came Reagan. Reagan brought stagecraft to presentation. And he's the first one who actually had used the First Lady box. Remember when that Air Florida plane crashed and he had that guy, Lenny Skutnik, I remember? That's when it all started, when they started having people sitting next to the First Lady, and they point out, let's honor this person, let's honor that for their accomplishment, business leaders, all of them. It started with Reagan, because he was a master at stagecraft because of his acting background. And then, now we have Donald Trump, who has mastered social media. So what that means is that if you're an executive, you essentially have to be a 5-tool communicator. By that means, you not only have to write well, you not only have to give speeches like this, but you also have to be good on traditional media. Then you need to know something about stagecraft, and you've got to be good at social media. So you see how difficult communication has gotten today? And that's what's needed today, because an executive today is essentially the chief communication officer. And this is something that Lloyd Blankfein, who's the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he said, one of the biggest mistakes I made after the Great Recession was not taking my message out on social media. That we got so much flack, but we were doing so many good things that we just didn't get our message out. If I had to do one thing again, I would have been more out on social media to get my message out, not just to the people on the business side, but also to the common man, so they knew that what Goldman Sachs was doing, so we didn't have to take all that flack. Executive development. So executive means that it's a long game. It's something you start when you first get into workforce, even before that, maybe from college. And you have to work smart, network smart, and plan smart. So I'll go through each one of them in this talk. So the most important here, in my opinion, that you need is this thing, political knowledge. You can have the technical knowledge, which I believe will you can go from an individual, valued individual contributor to maybe a technical manager. And operational knowledge will help you get to maybe senior level management, mid-level to senior level management. But political knowledge is necessary to get to that executive level position. And I'll give you a perfect example. So I was at Oracle in the late 90s. And Oracle at that time was pushing this vision of Larry Ellison, who was the CEO of network computing, which today we know it as cloud. Right? Cloud we all know, right? But that's not what it was called then. It was called network computing. And I volunteered. I said, I really believe in this, and I'm going to take this message out. And so they had the network computing, they had the network computing architecture, and they had network computers. What network computers were browser-based computers. So you didn't have to use Microsoft. So people say, wow, that's so cheap. You can just have a computer. Didn't do much, but hey, this was early, okay? And I started evangelizing. I did seminars in multiple cities in the Northeast, took it to the partner community, and I had given the most number of speeches. So this is what I got, just so you know, I brought it with me. These gold-plated pens for reward. But that's not the thing I want to tell you about. There was another guy at Oracle at the same time. He knew the same thing. The only difference, he was directly talking with Larry Ellison. I was 4 layers below Larry Ellison, so this guy was really politically connected. This guy I'm talking about was Mark Benioff, okay? And he's the founder of Salesforce.com. While I was going around evangelizing in different cities and giving seminars, he was talking to Larry, brainstorming, and he's already talking to how to, because he had a vision of how do I make Salesforce automation work like the way you shop at Amazon. So he had that vision. But now how do you realize that vision? He started talking to Larry Ellison and said, hey, this may work. I'll even invest $2 million. He even got Larry to invest $2 million. He knew Tom Siebel. He knew everybody. And now he's worth about $11 billion. So the point is, and again, he deserves every penny of that. The point is that the difference in being really successful comes down to this one thing right here. So you got to start developing that political knowledge. And without that, it's going to be very hard to get to the executive ranks because people are always taking shots at you. In the career-related, you need sponsorship. Without sponsorship, it's very difficult to get to an executive level job because these jobs are normally not advertised. So you need to find sponsors. You have to show them what you've done, constantly keep in touch with them so that they're willing to risk their capital and say, hey, by the way, you should interview this person because I worked with them. And believe me, he or she can really do a bang-up job for you. You need that. Sponsors. Find them early, stay in touch with them. On a quarterly basis, update them. If you've written a blog, send it to them. If you have done a video, send it to them on a quarterly basis saying, hey, take a look at this video I've done. They'll look at it. And the third thing I want to point out in the planning stage is thought leadership. You have to have a thought about something so that people saying, this guy, like Mark Benioff knew that he had the thought leadership around the Salesforce automation or CRM. And that's it. You can only have one area you could be a thought leader. You can't have multiple areas. And to get to that point, you have to produce content. I mean, how could you be a thought leader if you don't have some original thought that you are coming up with? Unique, there are no original thoughts, but something unique about the particular thought that you have. So you have to create content, and then you have to go out and write about it. You have to go and give speeches in front of conferences or an event like this, because these events are very important. You get nice feedback. You get people that are attentive. That's pretty important. Then you've got to make videos today, because video is now prevalent. And once you start doing it, initially, you may not get that traction, but then people will know you. Some people will not tell you, but they know what you do. And once you have that thought leadership, then you're in a position that people will take you seriously, that this guy, hey, he could be an executive. He deserves to be in the executive role. Okay, so at this point, we've gone over a lot of the stuff about how an executives think, how they speak, and even how they act. But the one skill, according to Eric Schmidt, that is so important, it comes down to this. You have to interview well. Because executives make fast decisions. And you could have the most stellar resume, but they're going to judge you in the 30 minutes or even less that they're going to spend with you. That means you've got to really, really take all of that, compress it, and perform. So when you're interviewing, you're not there answering questions. You're essentially doing a job. It's really a proxy for doing a job. That interview really is not an interview, it's a misnomer. You're really doing a job, so that's what you have to demonstrate. And performance persuades. Logic will not help you here. Performance. And we see that all the time in these political hearings, all of that. They always say, he really performed well. We go by performance. So executives are excellent performers. And one of my favorite, actually, is Warren Buffett. He's 87 years old. He's just amazing. He still can outperform just about anybody. He's got so much energy. So when I look at Warren Buffett, and I'm like, wow, he's doing it, he's 87. What's my excuse for not doing it, right? So performance is extremely an important thing that executives have to master. So interviewing, we mentioned, is an important skill, but how do you do that? So you have to start reframing your interview early. Because executive people, when you're an executive hire, looking to fill an executive position, you become a strategic hire. So you can't be interviewing. You want to have a strategic conversation so that you and the company can make a joint strategic decision. So what does that mean? You want to talk about, when you're talking with the other person, what are our winning aspirations? Where do we play? What customers are we trying to go after? How will we win? What current capabilities do we possess? What capabilities do we need? Because at the end of the day, they're not hiring you so that you can score points in the interview. They have to make a strategic decision because they have limited resources. And if they don't make the right decision, they may become irrelevant, as we saw on that other side. They're paranoid, right? Because the change is happening. And when you're interviewing, you have to make them feel comfortable that you're the person who gets it and who knows how to manage that change, can help them overcome anything that's coming their way. So how do you design this conversation? That is the question. So now if you agree that yes, I gotta go into this with having that, I want to have that strategic conversation, but how do I do it? So the way you do it is you need to have an opening, a middle, a closing, and a follow-up. Now, one thing I forgot to mention in the slide that I showed with being an effective executive, we're essentially going to map that to this conversation. So you remember that an effective executive asks two questions, what needs to be done and what's right for the enterprise? That's going to be your opening, okay? Your middle is going to be that action. It's loosely, but I'm just giving you an idea, because you have to, again, if that's what's making an effective executive, then you have to interview like an effective executive too. And the closing is where you're going to get the buy-in and hopefully get the offer. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. So let's get to the opening. What do you want to do in the opening? Okay, so if somebody is willing to interview you, saying, okay, you got sponsored and now you're interviewing, let's say it's a phone interview. The first question, because you need to get that knowledge, the first question that is absolutely critical is, you want to know in one sentence, what is this job about? What is the main thing the company's trying to do? What makes this job so strategic? That's the knowledge that you must have. And that's the point you must keep repeating over and over again. So I was coaching one military veteran, and he was going for an interview at Amazon. And his name was Jelani. And I said, Jelani, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. I cannot prepare you for the question they ask you, because they don't tell me that. But I can tell you how you can respond to any question they ask. You can talk about something from your military background, how it relates to what Amazon's doing. But at the end all the answers with, but it's all about customers. Because that's what Amazon cares about. It's all about customers. And he said his interview was supposed to last for 45 minutes. He said, and it went on for an hour and a half. And I said, because the other parts are kind of hard, but the one thing that Amazon really cares about is customers. And we see it all the time. I have never had any problem with Amazon regarding their customer service. So that one question is very important. In one sentence, it has to be one sentence, because if you look at job descriptions, I get confused. I feel like nobody can ever qualify for any of these jobs. So right away, in one sentence, what is this job all about? Then you got to take that job description off the table, and the second thing you want to take off the table is your resume. So you find out what are the 3 things they like about your resume. What are the 3 things that if they read it, because this will tell you whether they even read your resume. What are the 3 things that stand out? And the important one is, what is the one concern that you have about my background? That's the elephant in the room, by the way. This is the elephant in the room. If they're honest that you're not getting a job, it's this. And this is something you have to take care of during the interview. And once you have that, then you got to get into that Joan Rivers mode. Can we just talk now, So this is the opening. It's pretty simple. This is not that difficult. Because if you don't do this, then you're not seizing control of the interview. At this point, if you suddenly get into that interrogation mode, it's going to be very hard for you to get back into that conversation zone. And if you're not in the conversation zone, then you're not acting like an executive. Hope that makes sense. Now comes the meat of the conversation, the middle. The whole point here is to establish trust. Now, trust gets established, you have to be likable, you have to show that you're a person of character, and that you're competent. Competent means your technical knowledge, your operational knowledge, and your political knowledge. And you always lead with the job, because that's something that the rest of it, if they don't like you, friend, you have no control over that. But job is the reason you're hoping that they're talking to you. Do you understand the job? Do you understand how you can get the job done? And do you even want this job, right? And at some point, you have to talk about profitability. Profitability is important because getting a job done is fine, but if it's not going to make the company's money, then why would they trust you that you are the person that can get the job done the way they want it? Oh, the other thing is ideas. Executives are people with ideas because they have ideas, and then they socialize it, and then they bring it up a poll, and they think now it's ready, let's do something. And a lot of people say that ideas are dime a dozen. That may be true, but there are 5 levels of ideas, right? Anybody can come up with any kind of ideas. It's like, how deep can you go? So one idea can lead to more ideas. Those ideas can lead to more ideas, to the point where if you get to the bottom and you actually implement it, then you're now an entrepreneur. I mean, think about it. I had that idea about the cloud, so did Mark Benioff. But where did I do? I just got up to the point at the professional level and I did seminars. He took it a level below that and said, you know what? I'm going to get people and build something on the cloud. So the difference between him and me was, I remained at the professional level, and he got into that level below me, entrepreneurial level. And that's the difference between somebody currently who's worth $11 billion and somebody who's still a professional. So I was telling you, the difference isn't that much, but it is a lot. That one level makes a big difference between somebody making it big, going from the level 4 to level 5 when it comes to ideas. And also, during the interview, one of the things I always tell people is, when you're having this conversation, and that's why I have to keep making sure it's a conversation, is that every question you're asked, you have to do 3 things. Tell, and then immediately you have to sell. And after the sell, you have to close. So that means that if you're asked a question, the tell will be based on something that you have done in the past. Because that's what you've done. You have an experience, you have accomplishments. But then you don't want to spend too much time talking about it unless they want to know more about it. After that, you've got to get into the sell mode. Because now the other person wants to what he or she wants to know is, how are you going to do that for me? But that still isn't enough. You can say, but here's what I can do. And you've got to take some chances here, right? I'm going to take some liberty and say, here's some of the things you can do. And you've got to do research here. But still that's not enough. Now you've got to close it. And the way you close it is saying, so what do you think? How can we make this even better? So now you have taken that person from what you have done, what the future potential is, and how to realize that potential by trying to close that. So suddenly you're not looked at as like, oh, he just answered a question. You just opened up a future that that person wasn't seeing before. And that's how all the questions have to be answered. Because if you're just telling, well, your resume is already doing that. You don't need to do that. But you need to kind of show that you have some experience that qualifies you to talk about what you can do for this particular company that you're talking to. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Closing. Okay. So let's say this interview at some point. Now again, based on all this interview looks like it would never end, okay? But it will end at some point. And now you're at the closing point. And that's good. If it's not ending, it means that's a good sign that there's a lot of things you're talking, because you don't want them to go from one question to another. You want to have a conversation, so one thing should lead to another. Not like that we got 10, 20 questions that you have to answer and then we'll decide. That's not going to make you an executive. You're not performing like an executive. So one feedback you want to get at the end is, you want to make sure that you have all the skills. They're comfortable with all the skills that you have. And this is the main question. Do you think I can get this job done? Because if they have any lingering doubt, then you got to address that. Because at the end, they're hiring you to get this job done. What is this doubt that you have? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it now while I'm here, while I'm staring you eyeball to eyeball. Okay? And then you have to bring up compensation. And this is not a place where if it's the first time you're meeting them or talking to them, you're not going to negotiate it. But you need to establish your credibility as an executive. That money doesn't scare you. Because until you start talking, when you go buy a car, the sale really doesn't happen till the money is discussed, if you ever notice. Mm-hmm. If you ever go buy a car, everything is really nice and fine till, now I got to go see the manager. At that point, now you're in for it, okay? So the real discussion, anything doesn't begin till the money is discussed. So bring it up quickly. But don't negotiate. Bring it till the end. And then you have to summarize. Now, the summary is very important here because you have to show that you are an executive person who thinks like an executive. Because you've now already gotten the knowledge on what needs to be done and what's right for the company. Okay? And also, you're going to talk about the 3 things they already told you they like about you. You emphasize that again. And then, this is the part where you want to make sure, bring it up, the concern that they have. Because that concern is there. And say, that concern, I completely agree that concern, but here are the things that I can do that I've already done that shouldn't be a concern anymore. And if it's still a concern, let's talk about it more, okay? Once you do that, you end the interview, because you show them you can do the job, you understand the job, you can get the job done, and you want the job. But the last question you ask, it has to be this. So, when can I start working with the team? And here's the thing. If they smile at the end, you got the job. If they have a frightening look to it, you're not getting the job. Okay? So you don't want to leave anything without knowing that you're getting the job. Because if they have a frightening look, then you got to help the person out. Like, what scares you about me? You know? So you always have to. That's your ultimate close, by the way, right here. This is the ultimate close. You can never leave an interview without saying that last thing. So when can I start working with your outstanding team? And I can't wait to get started. You got to be like that Simba, you know? You couldn't wait to be king. You got to act like Simba here. You can't wait to get started, you know? Okay, follow-up. So follow-up is pretty traditional. You know, you'll send a thank you. Got to do it fast, okay? Because remember, your speed is important, right? Today it's all about who can get things done smarter, faster, better, cheaper, right? Faster is very important here. But the one thing I'll point out is this thing. Very early on, you have to negotiate a 15-minute post-interview. You have to do that. And the reason for this is, there are quite a few reasons. One is that as an executive, you want to expand your network, right? So you want to know who these people are. If they took time out, because let's face it, when you network with people, they don't give you the time that you spend when you're interviewing with people. That's because that's part of your network now. Okay, you can't just ignore it like, I didn't get the job, I don't want to even talk to them. Bad. That's not what you want to do. You want to find out, this is not where you're going to change their mind. They already made up their mind and you have to respect that. Okay, that's fine. They were honest with you and they're living up to their agreement that they're going to talk to you, fine. Now this could be the other way around, where you may have decided not to accept the job. So you owe them the same courtesy. So it works both ways. Okay, because that happened to me and I'll tell you about that. The reason is that that person could potentially be your sponsor. You didn't get the job, but you got to the point where you were very close. The only reason you didn't get the job probably is because they didn't have another position right now. Not forever, right now. So this is all time-based. But if you keep that person in touch on a quarterly basis, things can change. Say, you know, that person really interviewed well. I would have hired him, I just didn't have a position. And if you keep that person in touch, when they talk, because remember, everybody at the peer level are having the same issue. They're always looking for good people. And if they tag you as a person who can get the job done, somebody they would have hired, but just we didn't have that position, somebody they found was a little bit better, that's fine, that happens. That person is going to, so that happened to me. So I had interviewed at Oracle, and I interviewed with this manager named Sandra. And I was about to join, then I got an opportunity where I was working to head up a web-based project in the mid-90s, which was big at that time, and I wanted to do it because it was working with AT&T. So I told Sandra, listen, I really wanted to join, but this project is something that I really want to do. So I can't join Oracle right now. And she was disappointed, but said, look, and she even tried to make me join, said, you know, having Oracle on your resume is not going to hurt you in your career. I said, I understand that, but I really want to work on this project. Well, it turned out 6 months later, AT&T pulled the plug on the project, so now the project was gone. The recruiter, I told her, listen, I had just interviewed with Oracle about 6 months ago. With this manager named Sandra. And he said, okay, I'll tell this manager to give Sandra a call. And she gave me a glowing reference that this next manager named Greg, he hired me. So that's how I got into Oracle. It was because of, at that time, I did not negotiate a 15-minute post-interview, but that's when I realized that that's something that if I was going to pass on one of the most important tips, it's this one. Because that shows you that you're thinking like an executive. That, hey, I may not get the job, but you know what? It's okay. I may get it just you knowing me. And you're the person that they want to know. And executives want that type of, they want to do that kind of networking. So I'm not going to go through this slide, but remember, you are constantly, as that person gave that advice to Scott Adams, that your job is to look for a better job, provided that it's going to enhance your career. So that means you're going to become good at interviewing. So you got to do analysis after each interview. So your win is not necessarily to get the job, because then you'll get disappointed, because then it becomes a goal. You're kind of following a system saying, hey, I interviewed, here are the things that I did well, here's some of the things that I need to improve. So now you're improving, you're getting better. So you got to do that analysis, your strategic conversation analysis, after every interview that you have. Okay? Okay, so at this point, you're asking, well, what can I do tomorrow? Right? This is all, I've given you a lot of information, a lot of content. You're not going to be able to do all of this in like one day, but what can you do tomorrow? I want you all to put together a 3-minute video. Okay? This is what I tell the military veterans that I coach. I said, look, the first opening, tell me who you are. I need to know. In your case, it's pretty easy. You're in the military. You're working for the most respectable organization in the world. So that's a no-brainer for you guys, okay? Who are you? Then in the middle is where you're going to spend most of your time. Your what? Like, what do you do? Why do you do it? And I said, if you're in the military, the why is like really easy. You want to serve the country. You want to protect us. You got to bring that out in that video. Your success. What is that one thing that you can latch onto that made you so successful in the military? Because military, it's not that easy. It's a hard job. It's really, some of these people, what they go through, when I hear about them, it's just amazing. And I said, what makes you special? What are your key differentiators? And then summarize it, and then your call to action should be, hey, let's continue this conversation and give your details. And the objective here is that whoever that's watching the video, whoever you send it to, would want to talk to you based on that video. Now this is something that you can all put together, because I keep putting this together. I always do 3-minute videos on different topics, because the more you do it, the better you'll become. You'll become much more natural. And we have to constantly be in the mode of constantly learning, constantly testing, and constantly improving. And there are really no shortcuts to that. There's just no shortcuts to that. So at this point, let me close out by thanking you all for attending. And remember, in companies today, you're either moving up, you're moving nowhere, or you're moving out. And if you aspire to be an executive, which I think you all can, you have to think, speak, and act like an executive, and any of you can land an executive level job. So thank you all for attending, and at this point I'll open up for Q&A, and then if there's anything personal, we can talk about it offline. So again, let me thank you all for taking time out and coming this evening. Any questions? No? No questions? Homework. Who's going to do this? You're all going to do it? Okay, so let me just tell you. Maybe you guys can make this special. I've given this homework out. The number of people that actually do this, I've found is 1%. Okay, 1%. So let's see, how many people we have here? 1, 2, 18? So what's 1% of 18? There's a half a person here. So 1% would be, maybe one person will do it. Who's the one person that'll definitely do it? Oh, okay. So here's the thing. Send it to me, and I'll give you a quick feedback. I'll give you feedback.
Okay.
Okay?
Thanks.
And
So you're talking about this 3-minute video.
3-minute video.
oh yeah, that's the 3-minute video I'm talking about. That one was just to come up with your own ideas. That I said, so I just said, if you have any ideas at the end that you wanted to share with the rest of us. So
I guess the question I have about doing the 3-minute, how can you do it without, because obviously you're talking about yourself, you're talking about what you're going to be able to do for somebody.
right.
How do you do it without sounding just so egotistical, or maybe that's what you're supposed to do? But
Right.
to me, if I got that, I'd be like, and 3 minutes seems like an awful long period of time.
Oh, then make it 30 seconds.
Right.
I mean, 3 minutes, I thought you had a lot to talk about, then 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes, that's what I wrote
I
down.
absolutely think all of us do.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you do it in a professional way that doesn't,
Right, but here's another thing. You don't want to sound like everybody else either.
Okay.
So the question is, you have to come up with your own style, but you can test it out whether it's working or not. So I can't tell you what's the right style for you, but you can get the feedback, right? Whether it's resonating or not. Like, when you have that call to action here, when you have this call to action, right? If nobody's contacting or want to talk to you, then maybe what you're doing is not resonating with them. So you're going to have to make some change. So the only way to do it is do it first, then test it out. And then you're going to have to tweak it. So if you think that, and you may have to do it based on who you're trying to target, if you know their personality. But you want to show your personality here. Because you don't want to come across somebody that you're not. So if you're like really passionate about something, then that has to come through in that video. Because depending, if somebody's going to want to talk to you, that, hey, this guy could be the one that we're looking for, then what would make them get excited to do that? So that's the question you have to ask when you make the video. Yeah?
So for the middle here, your what? Would you relate that to like a specific job description?
Yeah,
the
like-
various
Yeah.
aspects that they're looking for you to
Right, so if you notice that my tagline, that's something I want to point out. So if you look at this tagline that I had, right? You don't want to tell how you do it. So this is my tagline, right? They got to know what results you're going to be able to produce. So see what I say? Make people try on high stakes stage. Because that's going to generate questions. If you say, I could have easily put down here, I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, and I'm an executive coach. Okay, everybody puts that down. That doesn't excite anybody. But suddenly I say, wait a second, you do what? Try? There's definitely a question here, right? What does this mean, try? What does this mean, high stakes? Right? So right away, there's a question related to how I can do that for you. So my advice is do not put titles, like now. It has to be like a tagline, because that's what you're promising. That's what I'm all about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's your what, but then your why is also very important. And why are you in this? So I'm currently coaching this guy who's an event planner, and he's having difficulties. And so he basically told me, so what I do is I typically give people a mock interview, because that'll tell me everything. And from that, I created a 3-minute video for him, as if I was him. Now, I don't even know anything about event planning, but based on what he was telling me, I created a 3-minute video. And he looked at it, he liked it. So he's working on it now, trying to come up with his. And I said, you need to know why you were in that field. Because you like it, otherwise you shouldn't be in it, right? You like what you're doing. But you got to make that come through, so the other person, other people get it who are watching that. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Circle back to the interview slide where you sort of like to call out things they liked about your resume, to elaborate them. Are there strategies to inject that into a conversation? Because sometimes the way interviews have been structured for me is hey, tell me a little about yourself first, and they maybe get into this whole speech about the organization and how certain things work. How do you recommend to interject some of those questions?
Right. So after you found out what that one sentence job description is, you may have to interrupt them at that point. You can't because remember, in the beginning, you got to do it politely. Because again, the person who's interviewing you may not be that good. So you don't want to assume that they're the world's best interviewer. So you have to do it in a way that doesn't come across rude, but you have to practice that. How do I do it? This guy's not going on and on telling me everything about the company. You have to somehow interject and say, look, let me just first, before. So that's why it's important that you get this question up front, right up at the beginning, before he goes into, let me tell you what we're doing and all that. If that's how it is in the beginning, after a certain point, then you can interject, but otherwise, remember, he may do all that, but he's not getting to the essence. He's not giving you an opportunity to sell at some point, right? So like, what is the main thing you're trying to do? And if he's giving you all that spiel about what's going on in the company, so what is, you you can at that point stop him and ask him a question as he's telling you different things. And just say, I apologize, I have a habit of interrupting or something. You know, you can do that, right? So you have to practice that and practice with somebody that you know, that how does that come across? Like, yeah, sorry if I interrupted you. You can always apologize, right? They're not going to kick you out. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, so on the executive development skills and competence
Yeah.
page, the first column was work-related, and in there you highlighted political knowledge, so that's basically your connections, right?
It's how you navigate the whole political environment within companies. But as soon as you start getting up there, that becomes a really
Yeah,
big challenge.
the prerequisite, but what is stretch assignments?
Oh, okay. So stretch assignments are assignments that can't just be routine, that you have to take on additional work so that you can distinguish yourself. Because if you're doing what everybody else is doing, then what makes you ready to take on a more challenging assignment? So it's these, because whenever you look at these executives, one thing you see is that at some point in their career, they have really stretched themselves. And there's a risk involved, right? Like for example, Sheryl Sandberg, she worked she was a chief of staff of Larry Summers when she was working, when he was Assistant Secretary of Treasury. That was a stretch assignment. Now, Sheryl Sandberg's a brilliant woman, okay? She finished like summa cum laude from Harvard and from Harvard Business School. So she's already had the smarts, but still she had to show that she can stretch, because if she couldn't stretch, I don't think she would have gotten the opportunity to work at Google, because Google was looking for like top-notch people. That's how she got the visibility, by showing she had that ability to do things that were above and beyond what other people were doing. So the more you're stretching, and you know, stretch assignment is just something that you just have to take on. People don't give you stretch assignments from what I've noticed. It's just that you gotta say, you know what, I can do this. And that means there's a risk involved too. But look, if you want to get to today there's no point at risk. If you're not doing it, it's a risk. Because companies will get rid of you at some point in time, because they're looking at their own business interests. So they're not trying to enhance your career. You have to enhance your career. So you have to say, like, if I have stretch assignment, then suddenly I have something to talk to a potential sponsor. Hey, by the way, I took this assignment and look what I've accomplished. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the interview one,
Which one?
that one.
This one.
Yeah. So I have a tendency, okay, to try and like test out. I would ask them, okay, so is this what you're looking for in this job? Or am I understanding this correctly, that this is what you want me to do in this position? But it almost seems counterintuitive to your instructions, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm shooting myself in the foot.
Right.
Like I can go south, I guess, really fast if I guess wrong. Oh, no, we're not trying to accomplish that. You guessed wrong.
Oh, no, you don't want to say you don't want to say anything until you got some information from them, right?
Okay.
So as I understand, you can always ask. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. What you're trying to do.
Right. Okay.
So rather than just confronting them, just say, let me make sure before we move forward. Let me make sure so remember that, this slide is important actually. Right here. This is the thing. You don't want to move on until you really understand the job that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the rest of the interview, you're just kind of flying blind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? You guys are asking great questions. Yeah.
No, going back to the interview, and I'm not going to apologize. I've been blessed. I'm 55 now. I still have a job, but most of my career I've gotten it on my own merit. So now I'm looking for a job, and this is all new.
Right.
Because I'm looking for a job now. So I went to something earlier today, and it was very helpful with networking and everything. And there was a gentleman sitting next to me, and we're giving our in essence, a 3-minute spiel. I just want to know what the current climate is and how you present yourself, because I know that you want to sell yourself, which is a stretch for me because I go on my merit and I just have to learn to get comfortable putting it out there. But the guy next to me, he was like this hard driving car salesman and everything was boom, 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 boom. And he's throwing at me, do I really have to get that comfortable?
No, you don't want to be, okay, it's a good question.
Good.
You don't want to be something you're not.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you can't sell.
That I can't bump it up a notch.
No, it's not even that. You're there for a purpose. If you're going to add value to somebody based on what you can do, what you have done, that's the selling is what you're doing. You now have to make sure, like I said, telling and then selling, saying, look, here's what I've done. Okay, I worked in the industry, I've done this, and let me tell you how I can help you. And then you tell them, here's some of the things that I can do that'll help you. And what are the key things that they're really looking for, that they're not, I mean, they're interviewing, so they have some kind of a problem or challenge or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you got to get to the heart of that. So you don't need to be something you're not. In fact, that could actually backfire on you, because you're going to look phony then.
Good.
And if you look phony,
Yeah,
then
no,
everybody can, sniff out a phony from far away.
But is
So
that what the climate wants? Because I have to find
no,
a way.
whatever climate wants is. But the fact is, you have to remain true to yourself. Because if you don't, okay. So here's another thing that I didn't get to talk about, but now that you asked, it's how you exude that confidence on who you are. Because people are very contagious to confidence. So if you're confident who you are and how you can add value to them and create opportunities, growth opportunities for them, then you just say it. Look, here's how I can create opportunities for you based on the work I have done. You don't have to be a salesman or
It's
something that
okay,
you're not.
I'm really happy with that, because
Yeah.
just sitting next to the guy, if I was the interviewer, I worked for HR, he would have left me breathless after the first two sentences. I was just like,
Only thing I wanted to add is that you have to match up to whoever your manager's going to be. They might not like the personality of that person you're describing. To you, that appears to be, everything they would want, but it may not be what the job really needs. And I think you're right. You've really got to be authentic in yourself, because if you're not in that first interview, then it's going to be really difficult moving on.
Yeah, the one thing,
very happy.
the one thing I want to point out is, remember, that's why you have to focus on what that you can actually control and what you have no control over. If they're looking for a hard charging by somebody who just like a bull in a china shop type of person, right? Then that's not, the main thing is, that's why I tell people, look, I can't change your personality, because nobody can change my personality, right? My wife's trying, but she can't do it. But the thing is, focus on what you control. And that's this. So there is this very good book that Clayton Christensen wrote. It's called The Jobs Theory. And I'll get you the title of the book. I'll actually send you all the books that I mentioned here. But it's about jobs theory. And what he's saying is that everybody at some point needs some job to be done. And if you just focus on that, because Clayton Christensen's a guy, remember he came out with that book, Innovator's Dilemma and all that? And he said, I had it all wrong. That customers really, and he starts with a real simple example like a milkshake or something, that there is a job that somebody wants that milkshake to do. Otherwise, why are they buying it in the morning? And you need to get to the root of that, the heart of the problem. What is the job that needs to be done here? So that's the question you should lead with. Rather than trying to say, hey, if I do this, that'll impress them. If I do that, that'll impress them. If I do song and dance, it'll impress them. No. They're hiring you. At some point, they're making an investment in you. Mm-hmm. And they're not making an investment in you because you're a good singer or dancer, because that has nothing to do with the job, right? They want to know whether you get it, whether you can actually get that job done. So if you don't understand the job, they may not even understand what the real job that needs to be done. And that's part of the whole process. That's why I always say that if they can't describe what the job to be done in one sentence, they don't know what the job is. They don't even know. So that will tell you, who am I dealing with here? And then you can't feel bad, like, this doesn't look like it's going to be a fit, because if they can't tell me what the job is in one sentence, then where do I go from here? Probably not.
Thank you, folks. I feel much better.
Right. Any other questions? I think we have to, let me just see what time we have, because I think that's at 8:30 is kind of like a hard stop for us. Yes, we still have another 10, 15 minutes. I can still do more Q&A. Yeah, sure.
So one thing you mentioned that was new, for me specifically, in the interview process was identifying, or them asking you Either way, it's about negatives. So
Oh.
at some point during the interview,
This one, on this
Just
one.
like-
yeah, so at some point during the interview, every interview I've ever been in, it's identified your own negatives to the interviewer. But what you said is you want to ask them what the negative they feel about you. How do you navigate that? Because you pretty much handed your trump card by giving them the negatives first,
Right,
which then they can backfire, you know,
Right.
if they agree.
right.
Let's hope not. Or they find something else. So how do you do that dance?
Yeah, right. So that's a good question, actually. So the reason is that this thing is there. Okay? If there's something that's not going to get you the job, it's not because they like you a lot. Because if they like you and there's no dislike, then there shouldn't be an interview. They should just send you a job offer. So there's something that's preventing them from sending you the job offer. What is that? That's what they're not telling you. It could be that we want to find out whether you're a cultural fit. Maybe we want to find out whether you can get along with people. There's something that's preventing them from saying, you know, like if your father was owner of a business, you wouldn't have to interview. You'll get the job, unless your father's really hard and saying, you know, everybody has to go through an interview. You know, we know some executives out there, their children get the job no matter what. Okay? So the dislike, I always say, is to find out how closely they read your resume. Because I'll tell you, a lot of people don't really spend much time looking at resume. Because that can also tell you whether your resume is resonating or not. Like, what is in the resume they didn't pick up? So that means that you may need to craft your resume where they could tell you these 3 things we like about you. And if they can't tell you that, so if I read your resume and if you ask me, so Jay, what are 3 things that really stand out about my background that would make you want to interview me, talk to me? If I can tell you, there are only 2 things. I didn't read your resume, or your resume didn't bring it out to me. And then they know what they're looking for, so they'll tell you right up front. Because there's a thing that you know right up front, you know, where do you stand? So there's like the spectrum, right? They say people make decisions very quickly, so you're basically trying to find out, where exactly do you stand? Are you at 80%? Are you at 90%? Because if you're at 100%, then you're getting the offer. So, but they're not giving you the offer. You didn't get the offer, you're not getting the offer. Right now they're still asking you questions. So what is this lingering doubt that because they told you the 3 things they like, and you're saying, yeah, you know, these are the things that I really was trying to point out in my resume, they got it. But you don't put on your resume, hey, by the way, there's one thing I'm not good at. That's your point of the resume, right? But they're saying that based on our job, there is one thing that is a concern. And that's what you want to find out. Because see, if they feel like, so here's what happened. One time I was interviewing with IBM, and I had interviewed with 2 managers on the phone. One told me, it was for a sales position, that we're looking for somebody who was more sales oriented. And the other one was a technical manager. He said, no, we're looking for somebody that's more technical. So now, and this was my fault. I went to the face-to-face interview thinking that the sales manager is the one, because they wanted me to do a lot in this interview. I had to give a chalk talk, and then I had to give them a 30-minute presentation. So it was one of my hardest interviews, the amount of effort that I had to put in. And the end is I didn't get the job. And as it turned out, and I'm pretty technical, that the technical manager had the clout. The sales manager who I would be reporting to was new in that position. But I automatically assumed, so that was on me. See, I didn't do this. This is the part that got me. That's why I put this down. That's from my personal experience. That you should ask them if there's one thing that would prevent me from, and you're asked really uncomfortable questions, okay? Because that's what executives do. They ask uncomfortable questions. If there's one thing that would prevent me from getting this job, what would it be? Because you don't want to leave without knowing that is there anything out there that's still lingering out there that would prevent. If they say, you know, we're completely set, there's nothing out there that we have any question about. We know you can do the job, we have no concern. That one thing we dislike, based on the interview, we think you can do the job. At this point, you've done your job. You did everything right. Now it's their decision. The ball's in their court. There's nothing you can do about that. So that's how I would do it. So I think this is, to me, this is very important, actually. You want to ask them, not put in the resume.
I think it's similar to the thank you letter. it gives you one last chance to redirect.
Yeah.
And either emphasize a positive or make them more comfortable with a negative. You're doing it, you're saying do it in the interview.
Yeah. Follow-up letter, you don't want to put, follow-up letter is all positive. Because the follow-up letter is like, here's what I can do, but like I said, when you leave an interview, you should have a pretty good idea by asking the right questions, whether you're going to get whether you're moving to the next stage or whether you're getting the job offer. And if you're leaving like, I still don't know whether I'm getting this job, that means you didn't probably ask the right question. So why is that? Why did that happen? Like, what could you have asked? Because you had the opportunity. When you're face to face with somebody, you do have that control to get those questions answered. And that's an uncomfortable question. That's not a difficult question. So sometimes we don't like to be rejected on the spot, but like I said, rejection is actually not bad, because remember, you're going to become a master. Interviewing is a skill. So a rejection doesn't mean, that means that person, okay, could become a potential sponsor at some point in time. You can't get scared. So I'm changing the outlook here, because we tend to put so much importance on an interview, and we call it an interview where we feel like we go back to our school mode where there is a right answer to every question, and we start tallying up points. And I get people come back from interviews and say, I just did really well. So I said, okay, then you'll get an offer, and they don't get an offer. I said, wait a second, there was a disconnect here. You said you did well, but you didn't get the offer, so maybe you didn't ask the right questions. The uncomfortable questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Before the 30-minute presentation, you said a chalk something?
Chalk talk. Oh.
What is a chalk talk?
Oh, where I had to, whiteboard?
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Like,
Okay.
yes, so I had to take a pen and draw something out. It had to do with explaining to them about agile computing.
Okay, I was just curious.
Where I was using a football analogy to explain to the person how agile computing works, mapping it to the New England Patriots. So that's what the chalk talk was about. I would give it to you, but I've forgotten how that works now. Something to do with agile. I said how Tom Brady runs plays is essentially how agile computing works. And she was pretty impressed because she had gone to, the manager had gone to University of Michigan. So she got it. So at that point I was feeling good. But then I got the technical manager who said my presentation was too salesy, not technical enough. So that's how. Anyway, yeah.
A lot of times they discuss when you're going for an interview or you're going to do your a quick speech with anything as to network or introduce yourself, to put percentages in there, like I increased this job's productivity by 20%, or what do you feel about that? When you say you have the 3-minute video and stuff, are you going to put your percentages in there? What are you feeling?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. So some of the things I couldn't include in the presentation. So when I was saying that tell part, because that's what you're referring to, what am I telling them? And so here's how this is the structure I give people, and it's a pretty simple structure. So you first have to tell them, like at this particular place, what was the problem or challenge that you faced? And then you solved it, right? How was it solved? What was your role in it? Then what was the outcome?
Okay.
So the outcome, if it was what you said, it's all contextual. It's how you do it, right? That end result, this is what was happening. The company was really not generating any business, and here's how we identified this problem. Here's the solution we came up with. And after we worked on it, we increased it by 25%, and just show them that this is how much they were making, and give two numbers. Here's the raw number, and here's the percentage number. And then the important one is, what did you learn from that? The lessons learned. And that's what I tell all these military people, because they've done a lot. And I said, stay away from jargon, because jargon gets you into trouble. Because jargon will make you smart, but you're not making the other person smart. Yeah. Your job, anytime you give, so here's another, since you guys like public speaking, if at the end of the presentation, if the response is that this guy was smart, I lost. That's not the purpose of me getting in front and giving you a talk. But if you say to somebody, that guy really made me think, then I won. Because that's the purpose of giving a talk, not to impress people how smart you are, because you should know your stuff. But if I can make you a little bit smarter than before, then I achieve my objective. So every time you're in a conversation, but then don't use it. Once you establish your credibility. Yeah.
So actually though, if you were speaking with light jargon people, like, you know, if you're doing IT, your jargon is the same as your audience, then you can produce the jargon. However, you would consider your audience in the information, correct? You know, if you're presenting to IT people, it would be different than if you're presenting to a high school class.
Right.
So you just have to be attuned to
Yeah.
that and then present it in the correct manner, whatever your audience is.
Yeah. There is a rule, I haven't really made it formal or anything, but I always say you have to know the level that you're talking to. Like, let's say, and here I'm talking to mostly college educated or above. So that means that in order for me to resonate with you, I can't speak at the college level. I'm going to have to go much below that. I would have to speak probably at least 4 levels below that. So you're looking at that if somebody was a high school student, should also be able to understand that. Even though you're all college educated and professional, I can't speak at that level. I have to bring it down to at least at the high school level. So that's my rule, that you can't always speak at the level, because then there's a lot of miscommunication. Because a lot of people don't understand everything the same way that you understand it. So you can't possibly be speaking at that particular level. So you always want to simplify it, so that there is no doubt. And then always make sure that, I want to make sure you understand what I just said. Or just paraphrase, let me make sure I understand what you just said. Because it's important to do that. Because sometimes I may say, like I've said some things that may have gone over. It's, at that point, you have to come back and tell me, let me just make sure I understand what you just said in that slide. Did I get that right? You have to do that when you're talking to people, whether it's in an interview or in a networking session. You know, it's that quote from that Sam Raymond. They might be smart, but you know, at some point you got to make them comfortable. Let me make sure that I can explain it. So, in any situation when you're speaking, if you can take this talk and at least give a 3-minute a summary, right? Like a pitch on what I just, that means I did a good job, right? But if you go to somebody, and since you're staying, I guess I am doing a good job. That's how I'm measuring this. So if you go out and say, I had no idea what he talked about, I just completely lost it right from the first word. At that point, it's over. So that's the thing. Can somebody, because I do that with my kids. I said, you know, just tell me exactly what I just told you. Did I make sense? And if they can't, because a lot of times they don't listen. You know, kids don't listen, right? So it's interesting because one of the things that I came up with and it worked with my son is this concept called 220. And 220 is something I picked up from how these hedge fund managers charge. Like, you know, they charge you 2% for maintenance and 20% from the profit that they make. So I just used that. But what I did with that 220, I said, look, every morning before you leave, I just want to talk to you for 2 minutes on what your objectives are for, now remember, these are kids, so they don't get it, okay? 2 minutes in the morning. But then when you come back in the afternoon, when I come back from work, I'm going to give you 20 minutes where I'm not going to interrupt you and you tell me everything you did in school for that 20 minutes. So after I did that, I never had to help him with his homework. Because immediately he would tell me like, oh, we did this in this class, when we did this in this class, and I would just say, listen, I'll just listen. And immediately once you get kids to talk, because remember in classrooms, they don't get to talk much. So, and also when you do that, the next day, he has to be more attentive because he knows when he gets home, he's going to have to talk for 20 minutes about what he did in the school the whole day. So that's the way I measure it, that if you can take something that I've conveyed and if you can explain it, then that's your objective. Okay, any last, I think we got to end this soon, right? One more question or that's it? Okay, thank you very much. You're a great audience. Thanks a lot.